Mr. Chandio, welcome to this series. My name is Dr. Thanes Bhushal. I am currently working as a civil servant of the government of Nepal in the capacity of an undersecretary. In addition to this job, I am an honorary visiting fellow at the University of Canberra in Australia. So with the Hans Seidel Foundation in India, I have been moderating these discussion for last 1.5 years. We are focusing on talking about federalism mostly in Asian context, and therefore we are labeling this conversation as Asia Federalism Dialogue as a title. So it is, of course, my privilege, Mr. Chandio, to welcome you in today's discussion or conversation series. Before I start talking about the topic today, I would like to introduce Mr. Chandio for the purpose of providing some insights to our expert, to our audiences. Mr. Jami Chandio is a renowned scholar, man of letters, and an expert on democracy and federalism. He is an executive director of the Center for Peace and Civil Society in Pakistan, which is also known as CPCS, which is a think tank organization primarily based in Sindh province in Pakistan. Mr. Chandio has published so many journal articles, book chapters, policy briefs, and so forth on several aspects of, let's say, political parties, civil society, federalism, and public policy making, and so forth. So Mr. Chandio is one of Pakistan's most celebrated writers, actually, and also, of course, scholars in the field of democracy, civil education, and so forth, primarily based in Pakistan. The only two-time winner of the All Pakistan Newspaper Society Award in 2000 and 2011. He has authored more than a dozen books in Sindhi, Urdu, and English on pure literature, history, and politics. I would like to welcome you, Mr. Chandio, in today's discussion. I hope you are fine to have discussion with us.
Thank you, Dr.
Are you with us? Are you listening to me?
Yeah. I'm here.
Thank you. So the topic today is about comparative federalism. And we would like to learn some additional insights from your side, Mr. Chandio, about some of the aspects of why some countries choose to be federal while others don't. What would be your observation about, let's say, the pathways towards federalism? I would love to listen to your insights on some of the case studies from Asia or elsewhere to provide us an insight about why some countries choose to become federal countries. That's a very generic question.
Yeah. Dr. Thanesh, first of all, let me thank you for this today's conversation, and I also extend my thanks to Hans Seidel Foundation, with whom I work in Pakistan as a resource person. And your question that how this system was evolved over the years and over centuries. And Dr. Thanesh, you very well know that the emergence of the federal system was an accident of history. And it's not very old system. And almost all the federations in the world claim that they are not historical nations. They were born out of the compulsions of the circumstances or out of the mutual interest. So first time in history, when in 1776, 13 British colonies in North America, today's North America, unilaterally announced their independence from the British Empire. Then they realized that they would not be able to sustain their independence. And this is how the first ever confederation of the world came into being back in 1781 and through a constitution. And they had a long process of conversation and bargains and settlements. And finally, they came to a conclusion and they laid the foundation of the first ever confederation in 1781. But the confederal model did not work well in that particular case. And that's why they immediately realized, after having done the constitution, that they should opt for federal model instead of confederal model. And this is how a second round of negotiation and the whole political dialogue was started among those 13 former British colonies. And within 8 years, right from 1781 up to 1788-89, they transformed the first ever confederation of the world into a federation. So this is how this system started its journey, and they had their own peculiar situations and their own reasons to make a federation. And if we look at the journey of evolution of the federalism in 19th century, because in 18th century that was the only federation that came into being. But in 1848, after a brief civil war, Switzerland, a beautiful small hilly country, they also laid the foundation of a constitutional confederation. And as you say that we should also discuss some case studies. So Switzerland is a very unique case study among all these 29 federations, that they are simultaneously a confederation and a federation. So at the top, they have a confederal arrangement among all cantons in terms of the sovereignty and autonomy of the units. And under the confederation, they have a federation, a social contract among all those 13 those cantons. And Switzerland, interestingly, had been a quasi-confederation since very, very long time, since centuries. But it was first time that they had come into contact through a constitution, and that was second confederation. Likewise, USA and Switzerland, we see that the third federation that emerged on the global scene in 19th century was Canada. And in 1867, they formed a federation. And unlike USA, because USA started its journey as a confederation with a very lean center and autonomous states, and later on they transformed it into a federation. But unlike the case of USA, Canada started a kind of federal model that was apparently a federation, but they had inherited the centralist tendencies from the colonial framework, and they had a very strong center, and the provinces or states had very limited authorities or the autonomy, and that caused interprovincial conflict as well. You very well know about the interprovincial conflicts between Ontario and Quebec and many other issues. But I think we the countries like Pakistan and countries like Nepal and other countries in the other parts of the world can learn from the case study of Canada, that Canada, when they realized that the centralist tendencies would not help them out to make the country a very successful federation, they finally transformed it into an inclusive federation. And now Canada happens to be one of the very few federations in the world where we find even the right of secession for the provinces in the constitution. And this is how they have been able to resolve there. So, and likewise, Canada and other countries, the emergence of Germany, Republic of Germany. I have been visiting Germany since 2001 frequently because of this federal subject and studies, and I had a chance to visit many parts of Germany during many visits to understand the dynamics of the system and the reasons why system happens to be successful. So in 1871, Germany also adopted the system, and in today's world, Germany happens to be very successful. 20th century also started its journey with a newly born federation, and that was Australia in Pacific region. And you know very well that Australia is a highly, highly cosmopolitan society and a society of immigrants like Canada and USA. So, and incrementally, Australia decentralized their powers, and now they have strong states in the. And after the First World War, Second World War, we see that the countries like India and Pakistan and many other countries, we inherited federal system from the colonial system, British colonial system. And now, currently, as you said, rightly said, that in today's world, out of 194 member countries of UNO, there are some 29 federations, including newly born Federation of Nepal. I had a chance to visit Nepal 2 years back, and I think federal model was a better choice for Nepal in the post-conflict scenario that they adopted. So out of these 29 federations in the world, we see there are federations which happen to be very successful. But there are federations, especially in the African region, which have also learned lessons from other models, and they have improved their systems. Let me coin a few examples, like Nigeria. You know very well that Nigeria is a highly, highly diverse society, not only in terms of the religiosity or religion, that the thin margin between the populations of Christians and Muslims, but even when it comes to the language, ethnicity, nationality, regions and states and provinces and shades of culture. And you know that the country of Nigeria had gone through a series of conflicts, but now over the years they have been able to settle or at least manage their conflicts through inclusive policies. And the same is the case of Sudan, or the Republic of Congo, or the Republic of Ethiopia. That they have I think we, the people in Pakistan, or the state of Pakistan, or country like Pakistan, should learn from these African countries that how they have respected and accommodated and protected various shades of diversity in their respective countries.
Thank you, Mr. Chandio. I think that is really a comprehensive outline of how the entire globe is considering or has inherited, in your own words, the concept or notion of federalism in their own governance structure. Yeah. India and Pakistan, as you indicated, also got some ideas of, let's say, devolution, if that is the right expression to say, rather than just saying federalism, because the UK is still not very happy to use the word federalism when describing their own government structure. That leads me to think of two diverse principles through which countries actually move toward federalism. The first one is the principle of coming together. So USA is one of the best examples to describe this particular pathway towards the federalism. But there are some other countries which define the principle of holding together. The first one was coming together. The second one, if I understood correctly, is holding together. So Nepal, which you also indicated, is one of the newest federalist country in the world, which I think follows, if not in exclusive terms, the principle of holding together. So, so these two, and maybe there are many, or mixing of both could be there. So it's just an academic discourse to talk about how different countries choose to, in terms of the pathways, become federal countries. Now, this leads me to think of, Mr. Chandio, of the institutions and processes within a federal structure. Why some countries choose to make the provincial or state governments more powerful? We can take examples from the US and Germany as well. Whereas other countries choose to, make that's the central government in Indian Federation, for example, try to make the federal government more powerful than the what do you call it, the provincial or state governments. What would be your take in terms of designing federalism from the viewpoint of the power of sharing?
Dr. Thanesh, this is a very pertinent aspect of federalism, and you rightly mentioned the key dynamics behind the federal model. As you know that there may be and there might be and there are variations when it comes to the practices in federal republics or federations, but there are some common parallels. There are some common principles or the rationale behind the making of some societies as federal polities. And the very first rationale or dynamic is the the socio-organic reality of the diversity. Because all the federations in the world happen to be heterogeneous in their very social nomenclature. So diversity is the main reason, that be it diversity of the nationality or the ethnicity or the language or the religion or the culture, and above all, the interregional diversity. And secondly, the second dynamic, I strongly believe that when some regions or when some groups or nationalities or the states of the provinces join their hands and they together come to an agreement and they lay the foundation of a mutually agreed federation, I think sharing of authorities and keeping their autonomy secure and intact is the second dynamic, rather is the main dynamic, that they on one hand, the diverse groups, they want to live together under one umbrella of the federation, but they would never ever compromise their regional or the provincial or the state autonomy. So I think that is the second thing. And the third thing is that out of this virtue or principle, they develop a system which is based on win-win situation, where because in all the, you know that in 29 federations in the world, there are some more than 500 distinct and diverse communities, nationalities and linguistic groups and religious groups. So ultimately, finally, countries which develop an arrangement of win-win solutions, they happen to be more successful. And now this coming to the second part of your question, that these are the principles, these are the rationales. But what about the corresponding mechanisms that how to resolve, not resolve, but how to accommodate diversity and make the system inclusive, and how to maintain the state autonomy or provincial autonomy? You very well know, and we all know, that in all the federations in the world, there is a three-tier system. It means in the intergovernmental, interstate subjects like defense and foreign policy and immigration and custom and many more subjects are always dealt by the federal government. And all the subjects which are like education and health and agriculture and industry and environment protection and GST on services, general sales tax on services, and many other domains, those are normally and efficiently managed by the respective provinces in those federations. And you also referred about the local government system, the devolution. I think devolution of authorities and devolution of the responsibilities and devolution of the federal mechanisms from the federal to the state or provincial level, and from the provincial to the local level, is an essential part of the federal system because of two reasons, I guess. The very first reason that why federations should always ensure decentralization and local government system and devolution, because it is a very efficient mechanism to accommodate diversity at the local level. Because you cannot accommodate intra-provincial diversity to the direct extent when it comes to the parliament, central parliament, federal parliaments, or provincial assemblies. But through local governments, through local government institutions, we can easily accommodate and protect the various shades of diversity at local level. And secondly, above all, since the governments are all about governance and deliverance, so the end goal of any government is to deliver to the citizens, to the people. And I think local government system is a very effective instrument to offer civic amenities and social services to the citizens at their doorstep. And finally, the common citizens cannot make easy access to the provincial assemblies or the provincial governments or the federal governments. But in the case of the local governments, the common citizens can make their direct connections with the local government institutions. So I think diversity, accommodating and respecting and securing diversity is the key dynamic for any federation. and making a balance of power between or among the provinces or among the governments in the federation is the second dynamic, and those can be made successful with a win-win situation formula and with the approach of the balance of power among federal government, state government, and the local government. And
Thank
all
you.
three governments have their different functions. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot. I think that's quite insightful because in principle, different countries have different rationale behind why they design their federation in such a way that we can see at the moment. For example, why the Pakistan's federal structure is like now as Pakistan federal structure. So this is very, very interesting insight. Now, I'm thinking of, let's say, a horizontal perspective towards intergovernmental relations. We have learned so much thing about let's say horizontal cooperation among federal or provincial entities or local governments. There is a big literature on amalgamation of local governments. There is a collaborative governance which also talks about provincial governments, let's say joint initiatives to implement certain public policies and so forth. We also have some idea about how this vertical dimension of intergovernmental relations is working, and in the generic picture of this literature is like top down. And the federal government, as you also indicated in a previous conversation, the federal government gives some instructions to the provincial government, and then provincial governments also have some stake to say something to the local governments, or sometimes they remain silent when it comes to the directions to be followed by local governments given to them by the federal government. So what would be your impression about how can we better address the challenges in terms of defining intergovernmental relations, particularly from the viewpoint of horizontal skeleton, bottom up or top down?
This is also a very important aspect of significant aspect of federalism, and you say that there are normally two aspects of the relationships or the sharing of authorities or the kind of interactions. One is a vertical domain. When there's a federal government at the top, and there's a combo of the states or the provinces at the second tier. So when it comes to the vertical distribution of the resources or the authorities or the powers or the power sharing, then the federal polity, federal republic or federal government is supposed to be one entity. And on the other hand, all the states or the provinces are considered as a common domain, which can jointly bargain with the center, with the federal government, and they can secure their legitimate or constitutional or fiscal rights as a common domain. But you rightly said that there is another aspect of the intergovernmental relationships, and that is the horizontal aspect. It means when we say horizontal, it means now the states or the provinces are not supposed to deal with the federation or with the center, but they would be settling down their conflicts or their issues among each other. And every federation, because as we said in the beginning, that the federations are not the homogeneous entities. And when it comes to the heterogeneity of the societies, we all can imagine and see and experience that there would always be conflict of the interest. There would always be competing narrative or narratives on fiscal, political, constitutional, and all matters of the federation and their interest. So the second aspect, that is horizontal, is also equally important. And in the case of Pakistan, for example, I can give you an example that we have one ministry of intergovernmental relationships, though it is not very much active and vibrant, but constitutionally there's a ministry. We have Council of Common Interest, and in the Council of Common Interest, both the vertical and the horizontal issues are settled and discussed, because we have 8 members in the council, 4 from the respective provinces, and 4 from the federal governments. And this is how Council of Common Interest addresses the conflictual issues among the governments through a consensus paradigm and not with the majority vote. And secondly, there is also, for example, I can give an example that in all the federations, there is bicameral legislature. And the House of the Federation, that is supposed to be the Senate, has the same role, because Senate is the house in the parliament which has equal numbers of the seats or the members from all the respective provinces, states, regardless of their demographic ratio in the federation. And especially in the case of Pakistan, I can give you an example that in our fiscal domain, we have a federal National Financial Award, NFC award. And you can find details in my papers that I sent to you, that in the NFC award, where the fiscal distribution is being done, again, we have 2 kinds of arrangements: vertical arrangement between the center and the provinces, and the horizontal arrangement among the states or the provinces, where they distribute the resources on the basis of some agreed parameters. Though in Pakistan, it had always been a very centralized mechanism. But coming to the generic aspect of this question, that since federations are based on social contracts, federations are heterogeneous, federations are based on competitive interest groups. So every successful federation needs to develop some mechanisms between the federal government and the respective states or provinces, and among and I would say that it is not only the business between the center and the respective provinces, but there should be, and there is a mechanism in all the federations, also between the provincial and the local governments.
Okay, great. Sorry, Ms. Chandio, I have to interrupt you there, although there was a very interesting angle of the interpretation of how both horizontal and vertical dimensions of the studies of federalism are on the rise in recent times. Today, we captured many of the dimensions of comparative federalism, not only based on the experience in Asia, but also you brought some examples in Africa, also from Northern America as well. We also touched upon some of the dimensions of the structure, the institution and processes of federalism and so forth. And we also talked about the intergovernmental relations within there. Now, I'm more interested to learn about a little bit, we don't have much time, about the challenge posed by the COVID-19 pandemic on Pakistan's federalism. I have heard that the Pakistani federal government has devolved power and resources historically to its provinces to tackle the challenges posed by the pandemic. Does it mean that there is a significant impact of the virus on the way we have been implementing our federations around the world? Do you have any comments or observation on this particular dimension of the question?
Dr. Thanesh, let me respond to this question in a way that it was not federal government, sitting federal government, that devolved actually the powers, but it was basically done in 2010 when the 18th constitutional amendment was made in the constitution. And you know that before the 18th amendment, the Constitution of Pakistan claimed to be a parliamentary form of head of a system, and it was transformed into a quasi-federal, quasi-presidential and quasi-parliamentary system. And in 18th Constitutional Amendment, it amended 103 articles out of 286 articles of the Constitution. So the concurrent list was abolished in the amendment. So it was not the federal government that did this, but it was basically done through the 18th Constitutional Amendment back in 2000. Although it is not fully implemented yet after having passed almost a decade. But coming to your second part of the question about the pandemic, because you know that pandemic situation across the globe has also immensely impacted our political systems and traditional conventional policies and priorities. So when it comes to Pakistan, the very first challenge that Pakistan faced, that the federation had a different policy, the federal government had a different policy, and some provinces, especially my province, the province of Sindh, did not agree with the federal government. So there were, because in other respective provinces, the government was of the same party, which is in the center. So this was a very interesting situation where, on a very pertinent concern of pandemic, the federal government and the provincial government were at opposite ends. And I don't mind it. I think this is the beauty of the federations, that the governments make their decisions according to their objective circumstances and realities. And this was witnessed and experienced in Pakistan at large scale. Many people, traditional people, take it as a problem, but I think it was an opportunity for the Federation of Pakistan to start to develop a culture of dialogue, inclusiveness, and bargaining, and there were some rounds of discussions and negotiations between the governments, and finally, on many aspects, both the governments also agreed on common policies. So this is how federations live with the realities, that on some issues you develop consensus, you develop agreements, and on many issues, because of the different situations on ground, the governments happen to be on opposite ends. And I think that is also we should learn from these experiences, that federations are not supposed to come up with consensus always on all issues, because the realities on ground are different on many occasions. So I think the conflict of policy, public policy, between the federal government and the provincial governments was also an experience for Pakistani Federal Republic or the society or the provinces, that how they negotiated and finally they settled down their issues.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chandio. This leads us to conclude today's conversation. I hope the audiences who are watching this video have enjoyed our conversation on comparative federalism, focusing on many countries in Asia and elsewhere. With these words, I would like to thank you, Mr. Chandio, with my sincere thankfulness for being available to talk with us and sharing your observation, academic insights, experience about how different countries have experienced or experimented federalism in their countries.